Hello, this is Sue Watkins with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals at Northern Arizona University. Thank you for joining the webinar. Next slide. This is the last webinar of a series of webinars that the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals has been offering. Today's webinar is going to focus on outreach and education. The webinar is being recorded and the presentation will be posted on ITEP's Climate Change webinar page. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the question chat box. You should be able to find that on the right side of your screen. And at the end of the presentation, the presenter will address the questions. Next slide. This is just my contact information and Christina's contact information. Christina has been helping me with the webinars. Okay, next slide. Mansell Nelson is our presenter today. I will turn it over to him so he can introduce himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue and Christina. I appreciate being invited to participate in your webinar series, and I'm excited to be talking about the climate change education because that's something I've been doing for a long time now. I've been working in tribal schools for over 20 years after having a 15-year military stint, and I've been enjoying this work, and of course a lot of my work has been environmental and specifically with climate change. So the presentation is going to be about climate change education, and we have a number of different resources on our website which you see at the bottom of the slide, so feel free to check out our resources. And I am also a resource. So feel free to contact me if I can be of any assistance. So ITEP is, the main office is here at the Northern Arizona Mountain Campus in Flagstaff, Arizona. You can see our beautiful mountains in the background, and we believe we have a beautiful campus, and I'd like to share with you some information about our programs that we offer here at ITEP. So this is an overview of the presentation. I'm going to be talking about climate change education generally, and then some education guidelines and standards that you might want to be aware of as you're working with schools, and just give you some sample programs from the efforts that we have been doing both during the summer and during the school year with a variety of different organizations, and then talk specifically about some curriculum materials and some reading materials that you might want to use in your efforts for climate change education. So just a quick update or information on the Environmental Education Outreach Program, which I'm the program manager for. Our vision and mission is to foster life-changing learning experiences in applying science, math, technology, and engineering to local issues that will empower American Indian students of all ages. And so I do work predominantly with the K-16 population, but occasionally get to work with the tribal staff, which I always enjoy and find interesting. And I work with teachers, college professors, so a wide variety of folks use our resources, and I have the opportunity to work with them. This is just a list of our primary goals. We're really focused on recruiting and retaining tribal students in the environmental, the sciences, engineering, and health careers. We also work with the K-12 in their science literacy programs and also with tribal colleges. And as I mentioned, I get to work with the tribal environmental professionals doing effective environmental education. In fact, this webinar then is one of those opportunities, because I know most of the folks on the webinar today are tribal staff looking at ways that they can reach out to their communities and to students within their community. And incidentally, I also work on indoor quality, and some people might think that climate change and indoor quality don't have a lot of related, but there's actually a recent publication that tells us that there's a lot of implications for indoor air quality because of climate change. So it might be useful to just first define global warming and climate change, and of course these terms sometimes get used interchangeably, although they're really quite distinctive, and sometimes we refer to them together. But global warming refers to the recent and ongoing rise in the average global temperature near the Earth's surface. And that's, of course, a very broad definition, but within that, climate change is specifically looking at changes in climate. And even within global warming, you could actually have some areas that appear to be getting colder while other areas are getting hotter. Of course, global warming refers to the fact that overall things and temperatures are increasing. And of course, there can be a wide variety of causes of global warming, both natural and human. So when it comes to education, it is definitely a multifaceted issue. We need to deal with science, and it can often be helpful to learn about and use different technologies. But climate change is also very political, and many of the decisions that need to be made in the future definitely are dealing with policy. For example, President Obama just recently made some policy announcements, and they're very controversial, but they are addressing some climate change issues, and they're not always directly tied to the science, but of course we hope overall that we're looking at science as we make these policy decisions. And then obviously there's many social implications. So in the formal realm, where we have K-12 educators working on climate change education, there's no one teacher that feels comfortable oftentimes covering all these different facets of the issue. And in fact, I find as I work with K-12 educators, they often avoid addressing these issues because they find them a political hot button, or that there's some level of controversy about them. And of course, as one that's working with educators, I definitely encourage both science and social studies teachers and others to take these issues head on. They are important issues that students need to learn about, even if there's some sense of controversy or disagreement about them. And of course, I also give specific advice, and this advice applies to anyone who's wanting to engage in climate change education. I'm working with the teachers, but if I'm working with tribal staff, I would also tell you exactly the same things when it comes to the education aspects. And of course, as tribal staff, I would encourage you to work with the educators in your community and with others to do climate change education. But one of the things that I have observed over the years, and I would definitely encourage, is avoid the gloom and doom approach. We don't want to convey to students that that this is a problem that's going to overcome us and that's a doom situation, even though there's some definite negative consequences that we expect. I'm much more interested in a solutions-oriented, action-oriented approach. And it's never my intent to convince students that it's helpless and hopeless and that there's nothing that can be done. And if I ever get to that stage, then it's time for me to quit teaching. Another thing that I always like to encourage people, and we want to be very careful about, is avoiding exaggerated claims. And even in our normal everyday language, For example, climate change, we talk about rising sea levels. So there's going to be a lot of coastal areas impacted, but I certainly wouldn't want to tell people that the entire United States is going to be flooded. So you definitely want to be very accurate and look at your facts and your information and not exaggerate. And then, of course, another thing that I think is very important for a variety of reasons is that climate change is actually a part of many intertwined issues. So, for example, the same activities that produce a lot of carbon dioxide also typically produce a lot of pollutants. So they impact on human health because of air pollution. We know that many of the fossil fuels that are implicated in climate change are also non-renewable energy sources. So when we talk about climate change and climate change education, there's many components to it, and you don't have to focus just on the climate change aspects. It's also an air pollution issue, it's a human health issue, it's having enough energy to meet our future needs. And of course, another piece of advice I would give is to make sure that we're looking at and relating everything to current and local events. We want to understand, students to understand, and our public to understand how these things are impacting globally. But frankly, people have a hard time understanding global issues and reacting to them and taking action on them. Whereas with local issues, something that they can grab a hold of and they can make decisions about and they can influence are much more meaningful. And these two pictures represent two situations that we experience here in Arizona, and particularly the one on the right is our EEOP has done activities related to dune migration on the Navajo Nation. We've gotten students involved in it, and we've used it as a vehicle for teaching about climate change. Of course, other examples, the Phoenix metropolitan area experiences these huge dust storms, and when I'm working with students from that area, that's the example that I would use. So when we're talking climate change education, at least when I think about education that leads to action. There's a lot of different kinds of things that we've been doing in the environmental realm, but a lot of efforts have been to inform people about environmental issues, and there's been much less understanding about what leads people to action on these issues. And so doing some research and my own observations, of course, basic knowledge is a prerequisite to action, but there's a lot more to it than just basic knowledge. First of all, the individual has to perceive that it is an important issue and one that matters to them and even impacts on them directly. So that's another level beyond the knowledge. Additionally, individuals must feel empowered to do something, and this involves specific skill sets. So oftentimes in environmental education and climate change education specifically, we forget about that we need to teach the skills necessary to respond to the situation. Not just teach them about that climate change is an issue, but what can we do about it? What are some decision-making processes we need to go through? How can we communicate our ideas about it? How can we get involved in adaptation and mitigation issues? So some specific things that we can all do, but we can also teach others to do when it comes to climate change. And we always want to make things as local as possible. So of course, one of the issues, and this is where education comes in as an important part, but also individuals need to stay informed. And that is just knowing what's going on and understanding the issues with climate change. However, we need to be careful about what resources we use for that, because if we're using just the daily paper, for example, we may get a very skewed view of what's going on. Monitoring activities is another important way that we can engage students and even citizens and tribal members on understanding climate change and being involved in it. So this can be everything from monitoring atmospheric conditions, monitoring plants, monitoring seasonal changes, all those kind of things. And all that data is useful in understanding what's going on locally. Then, of course, there's the more active steps that we can take where we can actually get involved in mitigation and adaptation. When we're working with students, we often work with them on carbon footprint calculators where they understand what their overall impact is to carbon dioxide production and how that relates to climate change. And there's a website, 350.org, that you might want to look at, and we've used that in some of our recent programs. This is an organization that helps us learn about how carbon dioxide is impacting our climate. And then I also like to involve students in specific adaptation activities. So I mentioned previously the sand dunes, and you can see in the pictures there that students are working with some plants. But there's a variety of different activities in local communities that students get engaged in. It could be service learning, it could be internships, it could be working with a whole class of students, or getting a community group together to address some of these issues. For example, in the Sand Dunes project, we've been trying to save a home that is being invaded by a sand dune, and we've gotten hundreds of students involved in that. At the same time, they learn about climate change and how it's impacting on the sand dune activity. So some other things that you would possibly want to think about, especially if you're working in the K-12 arena, is standards. And the Alaska Native Knowledge Network has done a very nice job of pulling together some resources to help you think about where you would want to do work as far as working with a school on climate change and a school that serves tribal communities. And they give a whole outline. It's a very extensive website. I'd highly encourage you to take a look at this if you're going to be doing any work in schools. Some other standards that you want to be aware of and that influence how schools operate is also the local education standards. And for those of you that are not aware, there's a big transition right now going on where the various states are adopting common core standards, and there's a transition on what teachers are expected to teach. And from everything I've seen, it may actually help us in the environmental education arena as far as involving students in those kinds of activities. But be aware that educators have certain expectations, and they're outlined either at the state or the tribal level. And also tribal colleges can often be very helpful in this arena. So I'd encourage you to be aware of the local education standards and how they apply to what you're teaching. And then there's other documents. Some of these are funded by the Environmental Protection Agency. The Guidelines for Excellence, Environmental Education Materials, is a great document for thinking about how do we approach environmental education. And there's some key ideas in the guidelines document, but there's many other documents on the NAAE website that could be useful if you're doing environmental education of any kind and climate change specifically. And they talk about skills building, which is one of the areas that I mentioned in talking about how do we lead people to action. They also talk about using an action orientation so that we're encouraging people to learn and then take action, not just do nothing with the information that they've learned about. So I'm now going to take a few minutes and just talk about some different programs that we have done as we have worked with students in a variety of different formats and different locations. EEOP is a national program, so those of you across the United States that are joining us for this webinar, feel free to use our resources and to talk to me as well as to Christina and Sue about your outreach efforts. We do classroom presentations and projects. We've had various projects funded by the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Energy, and even National Science Foundation, where we've been able to engage students in different kinds of educational programs and opportunities. And so I'm just going to review a few of them to give you some ideas of things that we've done. We try to make these activities hands-on, where students are actually manipulating things, building things, understanding things. So some of my favorite are solar and wind turbines, which of course is a form of energy that we may want to look at as an alternative to fossil fuels. And one of my favorite are my solar ovens. I take them with me everywhere, and anywhere there's sun. I can cook things and demonstrate things, and in some communities I'm known as the cookie man because I go around and feed kids their first solar cookie. But it's amazing how these simple demonstrations engage people. They help remember who you are and what you're sharing, and then you connect that to some knowledge and some specific actions you want people to take. Our Summer Scholars Program, which is something that we've done during the summer, like the title suggests, we get students together from different communities and we learn about different issues. So this particular program, the students are learning about coal production. There was actually a coal slurry line here in Arizona for a number of years, moving coal from Navajo Nation to a power plant in Mojave. And the students learned about that. They learned about the implications of it. They toured the sites. And I really want to emphasize here the importance of doing things outside the classroom, because if we really want to make an impact on students and get their attention, we need to do it in visible and action-oriented ways.